Hi everyone. Today it's our first English language based podcast, and we're really glad to have my really close friend, Anne Salmela, who is an investment associate at Antler and founder of Violet Ventures, which is the first student-based startup community in the UAE based in New York University Abu Dhabi. Both of us studied in the same university. Anna graduated New York University Abu Dhabi last year and has been since working with early stage startups, helping them to grow, to raise investments, and at the same time creating great things herself. We're really glad to have you here, Anna. Thank you for coming to our podcast.
I'm so glad to be here. Thank you for inviting me. And I'm so glad that I can finally understand an episode.
Yeah, welcome,
Yeah, fun
welcome.
fact. Anna was the first listener of our podcast, although she didn't
Mm.
really understand because it was in Kazakh and Russian. So now I'm really glad that she will actually understand and be the guest for our first English language podcast. As you know, Anna, the meaning of qadam from Kazakh means step. And the first question that we usually ask our guests is, what's the real qadam or real step that you have made that have changed your life? It can be a consistent type of steps that you've made, some sort of habit, or one concrete step that determined the way you are right now.
That's a great question. And I think the first step was making a choice that was outside of the desires of my ego and my wish to have a brand reputation on my kind of stamp on my career or my resume, and instead made a choice that fulfills me intellectually and also builds social identity and capital around myself. And that was choosing New York University Abu Dhabi to study in instead of London School of Economics or Brown or UCL or any other amazing institution out there. And that was a choice that I had to battle through for a long time, for a while I was deciding that do I fulfill something that touches my heart and creates a path of complete uncertainty for me in my life, or do I pick something that's more known, more established, and can give me tangibly returns that's foreseeable? And I think that choice set upon a path of myself of creating unknown steps and building social identity in a way that's completely unique to me as Anne and sets me apart from anybody else.
Interesting. So, as Peter Thiel might have said, you've made some sort of contrarian move when you chose the school. I'm actually curious, what what actually you have felt during this school choice process? What is the meaning of your heart saying that you wanted to choose NYUAD rather than some Ivy League, Brown? For instance, I think if majority of us got an offer from Brown, we would most likely choose Brown over NYUAD because it's recognized brand, and as you said, career might have been easier.
So as someone who is extremely future oriented from a young age, like I always started imagining myself as working maybe in the World Bank and helping with development aid, and I would Google CVs or LinkedIn and backgrounds and see where have these established people come from, and they're usually from established universities. And there's a reason why. It's because they meet the right people, they learn the right skill sets, and that gives them access to those spaces. However, I was lucky enough to visit different universities while I was choosing. Like I was invited to Singapore, Abu Dhabi, Cambridge to view the university and decide. And out of every place that I visited, NYU Abu Dhabi was the one that made me feel the most seen, accepted, and understood. I met people who had such diverse backgrounds and interests, and they were not labeled, like could not be labeled in a box. They had their, and when I came back, I was, my mom said I came back wiser and humbler in comparison to every other institution. And she would be really excited to see what I was like after spending 4 years in a place like that instead of just 5 days for an interview trip. And listening to that inner voice of who I could be in the unknown was hard, given the reputation and access and the career goals that I had, but it ended up being one of the best decisions of my life.
Yeah, that's great. So like that actually kind of brings us to the one of the main topics of today's discussion, so that we wanted to make emphasize on. And so like yeah, you're saying you made this decision and it like impacted in a good way. And so I was wondering also because like I know Nurpees, I know you, I met you before, and I met some other like friends of Nurpees from NYUAD. And so one of the questions that arise is that if you look at these people coming from this university, they all really, as you said, future oriented and energized. And like first question might be why there are so many that like kind of such people with such good characteristics, and like what may be one or two really reasons that they are becoming so energized and future oriented in there.
I think you're only as good, like the university can only mold as the candidates as good as the ones that they accept. So I think their admissions team is like first off like top notch. They go to every best high school in every country in the world and recruit from there. They see who are these candidates who are crazy and brave enough to move to the Middle East, a country that I couldn't even place on the map at that time. And how do they, so A, there's a pre-filter. Are you crazy enough to do something completely out of the norm and say yes to it? And then B, they also outbound and source these people who are already exceptionally diverse in their own schools. And then I think the third thing is that the financial aid package that I was grateful enough to receive, it offered to students who would otherwise be going to Ivy League universities, but might not have the financial means to go to that institution and pay for housing. So it also attracts these type of people that are exceptionally gifted, exceptionally talented, and want to find a way to finance their life without burdening their family. And I think that attracts a very conscientious and thoughtful group of people of like, how do I gain an education and give back to my family or support my family in some type of way? And how do I do it in a way that's not stressful for myself as well? And I think that has really proved itself over time, that the friends that I had in NYU Abu Dhabi thought a lot about their impact on their family, their impact on the world, like their footprint, and how do they examine like different societal structures of like poverty, classism, capitalism, anything. They analyze it because they come from different backgrounds and have the viewpoints to view it from many backgrounds.
Yeah, okay, I got it. So you're saying that like one of the reasons possibly that some of the exceptional people actually really go into there because like one of the reasons is that they don't want to burden their family and like these financial reasons. And so that's probably one of the like differentiators between maybe NYU in Abu Dhabi, right, and in US. Do you like see any other more differences between actually the same kind of branch of the same universities? And like, what other maybe some other differences between maybe NYU in US and NYU in Abu Dhabi? How do you say maybe like location itself impacts like those differences or yeah?
During my semester in New York, I think I noticed two main differences in addition to this financial aid difference. Was first is that I noticed overall like a different level of confidence and self-assertion of oneself as an NYU student versus an NYU Abu Dhabi student. And I reflected a lot on like how important is it as a young person to be a big fish in a small pond versus a small fish in a ginormous pond. And I was lucky enough to come from NYU Abu Dhabi having a pretty robust sense of confidence. I was already in my third year of university. I did varsity volleyball, like varsity jiu-jitsu. I was volunteering, I was doing internships, I was going to the gym, I was having a great social life, and on top of my academics. And that made me feel like I'm confident in challenging and tackling a lot of things in my life. Whereas in New York, objectively, being varsity football or varsity volleyball can only be your whole life because of the level of talent that exists in New York and in the US. If you want to compete with varsity in Stanford, you have to be spending every percent of your day thinking about that one goal, and hence you become a smaller fish in a ginormous pond. And I think a lot of people might have also gotten crushed along the way. They might have had setbacks, they might have gotten rejections, they might have not gotten invited to interviews, and it might decrease your level of confidence as a young person. And I reflect on like what choice is better. Maybe you get tougher and rougher at New York, but at the same time, what's the point if you already lose your sense of self at such a young age? So that's one thing. The second thing is that I think the bustle of the city and how huge it is, it makes you a very independent lone wolf that you have to fend for yourself. You're unsafe a lot of the time. Professors don't really care about you or know about your name if you're in huge 700-person classrooms. Like if you disappear for a couple of days, nobody's looking out for you. Whereas in NYUAD Abu Dhabi, you're much more coddled and supported. Like you feel like you can reach out to your neighbor for pepper and salt. You can reach out if you're struggling in a class. And that also builds more of like a robust coddling environment. And again, it's debatable. What do you want at this early stage of your life?
While we're still in the topic of NYUAD, it's interesting that for one of the previous questions you answered that you were interviewing for different locations, like for different universities, and you came back from Abu Dhabi much wiser, as your mom said, as your mom noticed. And it's interesting, what did you do in these 5 days of interviewing that you made this change in yourself, that it was noticeable for the other people?
That's a good question. I think maybe there was like moments of my life where I felt like always a little bit like the odd one out. And that might be as a result of being a mixed person in Finland that's like very culturally homogeneous, even in the capital. Or it might be a little bit odd, like the types of activities or the things that I find interesting or exciting or the things that I geek out on. I did go to an incredible high school and I was more likely to find these similar people, but in the masses, it was more individual. And when I came to NYU Abu Dhabi, first of all, this was one of the first times where no one asked me, like, where are you really from? They just embraced the fact that, like, oh, you're Finnish Mongolian or you're Finnish? Cool. Like, I don't really have further questions. Like, let me ask more about who you are as a person and, like, what your thoughts are like, rather than trying to determine why you look different or why you stand out a little bit in that way. And so it made me feel more accepted. And then B, it felt like, oh, there are people out there that are as quirky and different in their interest as me. And there are people like that where I can feel at home with. And this was like a level of like warm assurance that I found that I think maybe matured my sense of placement in society and in the world.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Anna, you were talking about the fish and pond comparison, and I'm curious. You talked about the benefits of being the big fish in a smaller pond. Are there any parts of your life that you wish you were a smaller fish in a bigger pond, coming off and graduating NYUAD and having a advantage of looking back and understanding your weaknesses to there?
I think that's a very relevant question for me now, as I'm also thinking about where's best placed to be. Ultimately, my goal would be to be a major contributor in the VC and entrepreneurship space. I would like to wear hats of being a founder and an operator. And I would also like to be an angel investor and potentially an institutional investor at some point. And when you think about like where is the best talent in the world for it, from my experience and understanding, I think a lot of it is concentrated in New York City. And then it's, if you want, I think there's routes to it, which is like really creating yourself and creating a name for yourself in New York. And that I think will polish your skills and also roughen you up a lot, which I think is very, very valuable. On the other hand, I'm also seeing that like potentially like building and contributing impact into your local environment can also be a route. Like let's say you create an amazing entrepreneurship ecosystem in your home country, and then you're able to create tangible value and then use that as an entry point into like other ecosystems. I think that's also a route, and also something I would look into as a young person who has difficulty getting entry level visas into the USA, as it's not accessible for a lot of people right out of graduation, for example.
Yeah, yeah.
We also know that you mentioned about creating an ecosystem in your local country, and you already doing so in NYU Abu Dhabi. We know that you during your studies in university already started creating this kind of community, and you participated in different kind of activities around that. And it's interesting. Why did you started to create this community?
So it was very serendipitous, I would say, that I never participated in any social clubs actively until I just created my own. And it was started all the way back in 2015 when I volunteered in Slush for the first time as a high school student. And Slush is one of the biggest European tech conferences out there. And I was literally at CodeCheck handing out jackets to all of the investors there. And I was hearing for the first time like words like VC or health tech, which I had no idea was about. And I never thought I would be an entrepreneur at that point. I only thought maybe I would be interested in the investment side because that seems tangible, that seems accessible. And then started a long series of like internships and work experiences where I did a bit of VC, I did a bit of startups, I did a bit of investment banking, working for operations for FMCG company, and all of that. And after traveling in like Berlin and New York and having those study away experiences through NYU Abu Dhabi, I started to see what is available for local, like for young people in the local entrepreneurship ecosystem. And I reflected back to like what I had access to in Abu Dhabi, which was very non-existent. There was no space where people were interested in tech and could like meet together. There was no like youth focused conference. And then as I returned from my last year of university, we decided to really create something where there's a space finally for the first time that really targets like encouraging entrepreneurship, encouraging that it's a viable career path. It's something that creates impact in society, and also showing ways of how you can enter that. And then that's how Violet Ventures was born, which ended up being my baby and my biggest, proudest moment from NYU Abu Dhabi. And we ended up supporting like over 700 potential founders with investor matchmaking, creating conferences, bringing top founders, investors to NYU Abu Dhabi to just show that this is available. And that was important for me because that experience from 2015, even though it was just like a glimmer of a memory, it was a seed in me understanding a space and potentially believing that I can be an entrepreneur at some point. And if that starting point would have started 8 years later, that would have ripple affected maybe when I'm 30. And I think that starting that awareness for a potential career path or a potential passion and vision as early as possible can have ginormous ripple effects in the future. And I'm very happy to see that already some startups, some apps are being built from the first programs and meetings that Violet Ventures created in NYU Abu Dhabi. And that ripple effect is very meaningful. And I'm excited to see it.
Oh, that's cool.
One of the best parts of Violet Ventures that I saw through Instagram, not really in real life because I've already graduated, unfortunately, when you have established this amazing student club, was top-notch guests that you have invited, including David Cameron, who was Prime Minister in the UK at some point, and some other amazing guests. And I'm curious, how did you actually achieve it as a student club, right? And organizing slash D in NYU in Abu Dhabi itself. How did you actually do all of these things as a student? Didn't you have like some sort of bias towards you And I know, how did you get all the resources and support?
Okay, that's a good question, and just also for some context that my journey with Slush ended up being full circle. Where in 2015 I started volunteering for Slush. In 2018 I started leading volunteer groups, and then in 2022 we brought Slush to the Middle East for the first time through the Slush conference, and we ended up organizing it again this year with my current team, and they did a fantastic job, and they like quadrupled the size of attendees, and they brought even bigger speakers, even bigger names. And I think what started back then is that, on the contrary, I think as a student, it is the best time in the entire world to network, because at the end of the day, you're a student, and you can say, I'm a bright, curious individual, and I want to learn from you, and I want to understand what you're doing. Because most of these professionals have already gotten to this point of extreme professional success. And sometimes fulfillment doesn't just come from getting another promotion or investing in another company, but fulfillment comes from passing down knowledge to younger generations, and seeing them absorb it and actually use it in their life can be even more rewarding than these other things that they're used to. And so I think understanding human psychology, first of all, is that these great people want to share and want to leave legacy or information and mentorship in this way. And then second is like feeling entitled to this space, because like just because you don't have a fancy title doesn't mean that you're not learning, or you don't have value, or you can't contribute ideas. And I think debunking that hierarchy is also important. And that was something that we talked a lot about like, how do you present yourself? How do you communicate in these like very scary networking situations? Because at the end of the day, people are people. They resonate with human empathy and communication. And there's no need to put anyone on a pedestal for that reason.
Like, apart talking about yourself specifically here, like over these years within this community, apart from understanding about your future and having like more clarification about your career, what do you think like the best takes, like what the best thing that you took for yourself out from this kind of basically organizing all of this community and talking to the guests?
While I was running Violet Ventures, we had a team of 20 to 25 people throughout the time. And I thought it was the most important lesson for me was that you don't need to be a CEO of a Fortune 500 company in order to implement processes and operations and things that you're passionate about. And doing something of your own is the most rewarding work experience of your entire life. Like, once you have agency over it, you feel like you can change the direction, you can change the strategy, you can take on anyone and work with anyone that you love working with. And that taught me that I would love to be an operator and running my own thing, being a founder. I think that is where like my energy and enthusiasm really came out. Second was the lessons of like managing teams, and like, how do you communicate feedback in a way that's empathetic but also constructive? How do you let go of people, or how do you promote people? How do you manage emotions when all of your team members are students who are not getting paid, who are ambitious but also don't have a certain amount of training yet? How do you like shape their learning direction and implementation? And I found out that that's something that I really, really enjoy. And at the end of the day, the lesson also from that is that you don't need to give people a huge salary or like a fancy title in order to be inspired to work. You need to inspire with vision and like empathetic communication of like, how do they learn and contribute to something? And that's the deep fulfillment that most talented people want to feel, is like, how am I contributing to something bigger than me? And if you can really nail that as a leader, I think that's like the solution to a lot of things. But of course, it gets more complicated when you have big companies and there's compensation involved eventually with that. But I think that's something core. And that's also something we saw with OpenAI and Sam Altman. Like, 500 people wanted to leave his company because they didn't feel like they were working towards the same vision without that leader anymore. And so
Sure.
learning that in person was great.
Yeah, I think one topic that we might have missed along, but I really wanted to touch on. So we've talked about so many great things about NYUAD, and so thinking about actually like in the context of Kazakhstan, I think we talked about so many great things that made NYUAD so special, and I want to think like, can something similar be created in Kazakhstan? I know there might be like Nupris can help me because he knows some context about like also NYUID and also about the Kazakhstan universities. And so like I would say like my university, for example, Nazarbayev University, was like one of the sort of trials to bring like Western education and then in sort of a new way into Kazakhstan and to kind of maybe make this one of the kind of connections between Western world maybe and Kazakhstan and kind of make something similar, I would say. And so I want to talk about how like something similar can be created and maybe what's something that we can do differently might be. But for example, because I also in the context of this community that you created, I think we don't have such a kind of big scale in there. And I want to talk about some differences maybe and like what can we learn from NYUID to bring it into Kazakhstan and to maybe in you specifically to kind of grow into the similar scale and have like such a big impact on like worldwide, possibly like talking about alumni and like communities that are created there. Like, yeah.
Okay, so first of all, I'm a very big fan of the talent in Kazakhstan right now. I think just after being exposed to Nurpis and his friends and the people that he meets there and seeing how much was invested in like high quality education, I also see it everywhere that like whenever I meet, there's so many Kazakhs working in software engineering jobs or like working in big tech and or founding companies. But what I find is maybe most of them have been launching it abroad or getting early experience abroad. So I think that's also a question I would ask is like, how can we have like certain visionary leaders within the national universities, like gathering, recruiting interest for startups already at that age and perhaps like onboarding high school students. And then how do you build the bridge between meaningful like startups or like meaningful investors as well, to show that like there's also a transition for talent to stay within the country and like build that startup momentum there. And then I think potentially it all starts from having that one person in that university connecting with that one person in another university and having that vision and inspiration skills to like build a community around them. And at the end of the day, like some amazing investors, like for example Jason Calacanis came to Abu Dhabi this year, and I asked him about community building, and I asked him what is the best thing that you can do, and he said just put smart people in a room and buy pizza, and that's it. Like all you need is that one person to buy the pizza and facilitate the room, and I think people will gather. And then once those communities have built, you can kind of gain that mentorship as well from more established and senior people to kind of funnel in to that vision and share knowledge exchange both ways. And I really see potential like VCs or LPs coming on and like noticing that talent, because I think the talent is there. It's just about putting them around a pizza box and then bridging them to certain institutional players at that time.
That's a great advice. We just need uh, our listeners in Kazakhstani universities, including Nazarbayev University and some other universities, just bring some pizza into the room. I'm sure you can get a room in the uni and just start the community. Um, One more thing that I wanted to add on this topic, I think the biggest difference of NYUAD compared to like best Kazakhstani university is not necessarily uh, the talent difference, as Anna already said. There are a lot of very strong professionals coming from Kazakhstani universities, but I think the only difference from our universities that there were no foreign students, or there are very little number of foreign students. I think the advantage of the UAE, and I'm very grateful for that, they gave full scholarship, as Anna already said, to students not only from the UAE but all around the world. And I think although on the daily basis you don't really notice, I personally didn't really notice the diversity. It just felt like we're all the same. But I think like looking back into my university experience, I learned significantly more from people coming from different cultures. I learned from their daily choices, not only by asking questions, right, but just seeing how they make choices, because some of the choices are completely different from how I would think to make choices. And I think um, learning by actually seeing and living with people from different countries, different cultures, actually in the long term makes me understand world a little better and move around the world a little better. Because I think it was significantly harder moving from high school to university because the difference was significantly high. I had to use English everywhere. I had to interact with different people. But right now, moving from university to international environment, whether it be London or now New York, I think the move is significantly smoother. It's much easier to understand different cultures. Yeah, and I think it might have been great idea to accept international students in bachelor to for Nazarbayev University or other great universities too, because it would actually bring not only Western education but also international vibe that Western education tries to promote.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of immigration and knowledge exchange, like on a bachelor's level and like pre-graduate and all at all stages.
Yeah, yeah. I would add to that because like I think coming out of Kazakhstan only for work, it feels like yeah maybe it feels like it's different bubbles, like as Nurpris mentioned. So it's like they're not interchangeable, and if you're doing that during university years, kind of mixing up and probably like understanding people from outside more. So it like I think gives you a lot of advantage coming forward, and well, that's one of the real things that Nurpris said is really differentiates.
Yeah.
I have a question about like how you answered to the how we can create a startup community in Kazakhstan. It's very interesting, and I agree that we need more people. I don't know, students like at a young age that are building something, that's creating something. And like right now, I think most of the students in Kazakhstan, maybe including me, have this opinion that we need to work somewhere like in some big company. We have to get some experience, and maybe in 5 or 10 years we will start to create something. And I think it's like a broad kind of um, kind of thought. And I'm curious how, I don't know, in Middle East they the people, I don't know, created this uh, like counter uh, opinion that students can create startups, and it's like a road, as you said, you can create something and it's a road to be successful person, to be established person, and you don't have to necessarily work in a big company and get 5 or 10 years of experience.
Yeah. So I think to answer that question, it's not uh, it's not like student founders now in the Middle East or the UAE specifically are on a large, massive scale building an app and like getting venture funding. That we're very far from that reality. And the way that I think about it is that it's a lag, that you do something that ripple effects into something, and eventually 10 years from now, that might be the reality. And I think that's how ecosystems are built. At this point, Stanford dropouts or university dropouts in the US can raise venture funding. And like university venture funds are investing in student startups. And that's a signal of a highly mature ecosystem to give that type of responsibility to the founder and the investor at a university age or like a post high school age. For now, I think where the Violet Ventures effect is, like, we're still at the stage where people have awareness that startups are a thing, and they're starting to understand, like, oh, this is what a pitch deck is. This is what a business model is. This is you need to get licensed and registered in order to sell a product. It's like, it's still a very formative stage, and now the companies from Violet Ventures community that blossomed out of it, like, they're now building beta apps, and that's still far from building to like having like profitable revenue and getting venture funding. But I think that is going to ripple effect, like, so that next year it's not going to be 3 people coding apps, it's going to be 10, and then next year it's going to be 50, and then some of them get so good that they start raising venture funding, and then maybe 1 person gets venture funding, and then maybe next year someone gets 5 people get venture funding. And that's also possible because there's like a pyramid of knowledge ripple affecting into one another, that the number of student founders that you find that have raised venture funding is like so minute that seeking their knowledge and mentorship is going to be harder than when there's 10 people who've done that. And that's already where the US is like excelling exceptionally, of having like hundreds of thousands of people that they can reach out to for mentorship. And so I think it's also about not putting pressure on oneself when creating a community or trying to create an ecosystem, that like it starts from somewhere, and if you're content with just planting a seed that potentially changes someone's life, then you're already doing enough and you're doing great. But if you're putting pressure on yourself to raise venture funding next year, then that's a difficult goal to meet because it's just a different landscape and investment appetite at that point.
Anna, how do you feel about being the person who plants the seed rather than the person who gets the fruits of the seed when this tree grows? Because essentially what you are saying right now is you are one of the first person who is building the community, who is actually creating this ground to make it a bit better. And most likely, as you said, it will take another years, potentially several decades, to actually have some sort of fruit. And there is a high likelihood that you won't really get the fruits of the seed that you're planting. How do you feel about it?
I feel, first of all, I think the fact that I might have potentially planted the seed is a reward enough to know that you're capable of it and that's possible. If that means that I don't get any monetary returns or like branding returns, then I'm okay with that and I'm content with it. And Violet Ventures was it was a non-profit organization for a reason. And I think, to answer that, I am a product of the seeds that other people have planted. I'm the product of the first person who created Slush. I'm the product of NYUAD alum who I've never met, who went out of their way to give me mentorship calls and review my CVs and chat to me about my life direction. I'm a result of my parents' seeds to have placed values in myself of like how I educate myself, how I flourish and I nourish. So I think understanding that I'm an effect of all these seeds, and how do I want to use that knowledge, I think it feels great to know that I'm creating another tree. And I think that's the funnel of life, that if people have gone out of their way to give me an education, give me knowledge, give me blessings in some way, it feels natural to recreate it. And I feel like I'm a part of life. And I would ask the people in Violet Ventures as well to say, like, if you got mentorship from an older student, how about go out of your way to also have lunch with younger students and show them the things that you learned and maybe make their life easier. Because at the end of the day, the next generation is going to be stronger and better and more agile. And to know you were a part of that fruit of life is beautiful, in my opinion.
That's great. Almost geometric progression of giving. I just imagine the tree that is growing exponentially. Now, changing gears a little bit, Anna, we want to talk more about your professional life and the choices that you have made. One of the interesting stuff that happened last year was you choosing one particular career over the other. And we want to first start with your life as an investment banker at one of the best investment banking institutions called Morgan Stanley. Getting the offer from there, working as an intern, doing great projects there. First, before we talk about your experience, it would be great to just give a little bit background of what is investment banking, because you're our first non-tech guest in like in the VC and investment world. And then I guess we can transition more towards your experience in that world and ask further questions.
So investment bankers are financial aids, I would say, to a varied number of financial transactions a company might go through. Maybe it's a mergers and acquisition. Maybe they're looking to raise equity. Maybe they're looking to raise debt. Maybe they're looking to IPO. That's when a company would seek services from an investment bank to help them with the process. Just because there's a lot of paperwork, a lot of reports that needs to be done at a very high quality and at a very fast pace, and it's better to outsource it if they don't have an in-house financial team for that. So, why I joined investment banking is because I think if I just looked at all of the people that I was aspiring to become, I think, I don't know if other people do this, but I would look at the people that I think are doing the coolest stuff ever right now. I would go to their LinkedIn and then I would scroll all the way to the bottom and then I would see investment banking analyst in so many of them. And I was like, like there must be something going on here so that so many of my role models and aspirations have done this 1 year, whether it's at JP, Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley. There's something about it. And so I thought, like, why not? I might as well do an internship to learn. I'm not committed for the rest of my life to do it. And it gives me a taste of like, what are the skill sets that people are looking for? That's tangibly why I applied.
And you have applied and you have gotten offers from those places, not only investment banking, but also some other great hedge funds and stuff. I'm curious what in investment banking made you not go in that sphere. In particular, would love to hear some sort of examples from your experience being an intern there.
So I have the greatest respect for the team that I was working at. Extremely professional, extremely high quality workers, and taught me and educated me a lot on what they know. I think fundamentally, for me, investment banking was a means to an end, and my end was entrepreneurship. And I think investment banking and consulting can be used really well as like buffer years if you're an intelligent person who's determining what they want to do next and what that purpose is. But then I said to myself, like, I so clearly know my end. Why would I not jump to that end faster and sooner by meeting people who are already in the entrepreneurship space, meeting people who are already talking to me about concepts like business models or raising equity and like term sheets and things like that? Why would I intentionally delay my end just because I think it's a useful route? And so going back to that decision I made for choosing NYU Abu Dhabi, it was again another choice of like, do I choose the thing that feels like right on the CV and right on the paper that has a great reputation and prestige, or do I choose the thing that has the path, that has the unknown destiny and potentially can get me faster to my end goal? And that's ultimately the big picture reason of like why I chose that. So, but specifically within an investment bank, I had a feel of like autonomy and agency when running Violet Ventures. And so I also wanted to feel earlier on in my life, like, what does it feel like to have input on how structures are done, how work is done, how we communicate, and how we give feedback in a team? I knew that entering an investment bank would put me back in terms of how much input I could have as a junior in the team because of how many years of like knowledge and processes they have. And I think that's fair. At that point, I wanted to develop the muscle of like also having more autonomy, and see where that plays out for the future.
Interesting. So you end up choosing venture capital world afterwards, and right now you're working as an investment associate in Antler. And before we go into why and how you joined venture capital, can you give a little bit background on what venture capital is and what is the role of traditional investment associates in venture capital? How is it different from doing some investment work in investment banking?
Okay, so venture capital. So if you think about it as like, let's say a company is seeking financial services from an investment bank, potentially they would be raising money from like sophisticated investors like a private equity fund or something like that. So that's in a very mature landscape. If you go all the way down the ladder and you look at like a small, medium-sized enterprise, they would be seeking money from a venture capital fund, and they wouldn't need an investment bank as an intermediary, because that's a more sophisticated and complex process. And so hence venture, I think, sounds from the fact that it's kind of like a leap of faith of like placing your capital in something that's so early and so young. And then within the venture capital space, there's like also a ladder of there's like pre-seed, which is where I am. Then there's seed, Series A. It goes all the way to E, F, G, etc. And that's already in the spectrum of investment bank and private equity funds. So I think the investment banking experience was also helpful, that I got the exposure to the other end of the ladder while now looking at the early part of the ladder. And so to answer your question on like why venture capital, so I initially didn't want to get into the venture capital space after graduating from university. I think I was open for it, but there was also conversation that I had with a great VC investor who was a founding partner for $1 billion fund that had invested in like Revolut, SoFi, amazing companies. And we had a chat earlier this year, and he told me that after having experiences himself from like investment banks, companies, and venture capital funds, the best experience he would recommend for a fresh graduate is to put yourself in a room with the most high potential founders there are, whether that is an analyst class of Goldman Sachs, whether that's Palantir or whatever it might be. Put yourself in that room, because you're going to be a product of the rocket ships and the 5 people that you interact with most in that room, and you're all going to elevate in your career. You're all going to learn from each other and share knowledge. And so and then he said, from a venture capital lens, like you can always enter venture capital at any point of your life. You can be 60, you can do it, you can be an angel investor, you can pivot into it. Why not start with something that's harder to pivot into, gives you hard skills, and gives you access to that founder rockstar class? And hence I was open-minded, and I was looking for roles that would give me those traits, but not specifically venture capital or anything. And then it just ended up that the role that I ended up finding kind of fit all of those benchmarks in also the location that I wanted, and that's why I went for it.
Yeah, and so you followed the advice and actually ended up in the place where like a lot of founders actually want to be in, and so you ended up actually responsible for choosing the best founders for like worth investing into, and so like maybe simple question, what do you think what makes a good founder actually?
So I think that is a great question, and I think I will have a better answer with time and with experience. Seeing through the cycles, seeing through their progress. I'm still very new to the space. For now, I would say that there's actually one founder that comes to mind who I met when I was 12, and I knew already then that he would be an amazing founder. And he is now the founder of an incredible deep tech company I don't know what the valuation is, but like they're doing really cutting edge technology, which I'm sure would be acquirable by Google, Microsoft, etc. And I already noticed when I was 12 that he had very interesting projects that he was always ideating. He was creating like a snowboard out of skis. He was like sending balloons into the atmosphere with like a picture of the class on it. He was helping me brainstorm physics projects for myself and like how to create sand shapes using vibrations from a frequency plate. And so I think already there I saw that like the intellectual curiosity to explore different projects and like problems, and like if you meet a challenge, like how do you overcome it? Like, oh, the balloon's not going up in the air, why don't I change the setting of the balloon so that it goes up higher or faster or whatever? And that is like an innate curiosity and fascination with life that I think is going to be a very high determinant of it, as opposed to I think being a founder where you have a set monetary goal that you want to achieve, or like a certain amount of people that you want to impact or have as users. That is like an end, but you need, I believe you need to enjoy the journey and the process so much so that you like geek over small things like buttons and settings, because it keeps you up awake at night because you're that type of person that cares. And I think that's a founder, I would say.
What you described actually is similar to what I've recently read about Elon Musk's actual biography. With his recent book, right? Like he's always into those details, and he's like passionate about the journey and about the actual details of each car they make and each rocket they make, and like tries to improve every detail. Whereas like in general, you would think that sometimes founders are not really involved into those details, right? Like rather than kind of trying to manage the whole picture and trying to visionate, etc. But as you mentioned, probably that's one really good things that yeah, I think for the also kind of visible in such a good and a great founder as Elon Musk.
Anna, you actually made me curious. Who's the Elon Musk of the Anna 12? It's just 12.
So he was in my middle school, and I ended up reconnecting with him after I graduated high school. And he told me, actually, like he bumped into me. He's like, "Hey, Annette, long time no see. By the way, I'm doing this machine learning course online on Coursera by Stanford. You should try it as well. Like I'm doing a couple of these." And then I started like also playing around with the machine learning course. And actually, in my first conversation with Nurpeace, he asked me if I have any coding experience, and I said, "No, not really. I've just done a machine learning course." I still remember that moment, and so then I think he ended up also going into something musical, and then doing engineering, and then founding a company. And if you're interested to chat in their piece, I will set up an intro.
Oh, nice. Networking through podcasting. That's cool.
Yeah. Well, one more thing that I wanted to briefly talk about is that when we were like preparing for this podcast, I was asking Nurpeace, okay, what do you say, like, what's one of the best features that Anne has that we can kind of try to talk about and understand how does she do this really great? And one of the things I think he mentioned is that great relationship formation. And from what you're already talked about, well, your experience in IB, in investment banking and venture capital, and about your actual creation of this community that now exists. Can you talk about a bit more, like what's maybe the things that you learn that really helps you to form these relationships, especially with those great guests and really big individuals in the like largest scope of the world? So yeah.
I actually lead a workshop on this for Violet Ventures, and it's like my favorite topic. It's about networking and communications. And so long story short, it all started when in middle school, where I really had struggles finding friends and like having a friendship group back when everything was very cliquey. And I would sit alone in the bathroom, like playing Angry Birds or something like that on my phone, just to pass time. And I think through like a painful journey of not having friends for a bit, I started becoming more open-minded of like, how about I just like sit at each table and start a conversation and figure out what they're like. Like maybe I'm not supposed to sit at this table and people societally wouldn't accept that I sit at this table, but how about I try it? And I think over that time, I felt comfortable asking people who are very different to me and from very different backgrounds just about simple questions and figuring out who they are outside of the labels of like cliques and groups and who I should spend time with. And I think that was a first turning point. A second turning point was that I was an intern for the American Chamber of Commerce during my gap year before university. And one of my roles was to welcome like top CEOs from Finland into our events. Maybe it's like CEO of Bayer, Microsoft, whatever, and ask them like, what are you looking for from AmCham to help with policy? Like, what are you looking for in terms of change in the business environment there? And at first I was so intimidated and I said such awkward things because like me as a high school student, I was speaking to such a CEO. What am I supposed to say? How do I look smart? And I think there was a turning point at some point of that experience where I was like, okay, they are people just like me and they want to laugh and share experiences with other people just like me. And I removed them from that pedestal again. I think that's very important. And so I thought of them as like, what would I say to them if they were my friend in this networking event? How would I behave with them? And then there was a moment where some CEO walked into the room and I shook her hand and I said like, oh, like actually like I'm working on like building a stronger handshake. What do you think? Is it firm enough? And then she said, oh, let's try again. And then I shook the hand again and she was like, it's pretty firm. Actually, I think it's good. And I was like, yeah, like blah, blah, blah. And then I just started like chit-chatting with her and it completely broke the ice. And we just had like a long chat about everything. And that was like so important for me as a lesson to realize that they're just like you and me. Like, how would you approach them if they're a friend of yours that you share your inner thoughts with? And throughout the conversation, you can also integrate like, what are you learning? Like, what are you curious about? Like yesterday, I read this article about this. What do you think? Like, do you know anything about this space? And then as you organically move through the conversation, you can ask more things about their background and share more about yourself. And at the end of the day, to be interesting, you have to be interested as well. And that comes from being a very attentive listener to them, being attentive of their feelings, their body cues. Do they want to leave the conversation? Do they need a rush? Just let them go. Like, don't make them feel awkward about saying bye. Or do they feel tired or lethargic? How do you address that and say like, it's been a long day for me as well. How do you like to wind down? Or like, do you do these a lot? Or, I think those type of things. And then building that over time and also recognizing that someone doesn't need to be important for you to have to want to talk to them. Like, there's value and knowledge that you can gain from every single person in the room, and showing like your curiosity for life and curiosity for people will translate in amazing things, and not thinking of it as a transaction where you're only speaking to someone for a job or you're only speaking to them because you want mentorship or something. Like, how can you make every conversation interesting? And if you can really hack that, I think you can make incredible relationships. You can find incredible opportunities, accidental things. And it's about like debunking all of this and finding it within yourself to find interest in everything.
I think you mentioned like a very interesting kind of technique or approach in your second turning point, that you like kind of imagined that what if all these people are my friends? How do I talk to them? Do you still have this kind of approach? Like, do you have to switch sometimes? Oh, actually, they can be my friends. I have to talk with them like a friend, or it happens just automatically?
I think it's now getting to a point where I'm relaxed. I feel pretty chill, but back in the day, I remember when I was like a sophomore in university, like if I had an online Zoom mentorship or networking call, I'd like put on like a blazer and like I'd put on makeup specifically for it, and I'd be like, "Hi, how are you? Thank you for your time. Like it was really nice to speak with you." And like I like looking back at it, it was so funny. I now have had enough varied level of conversations that I've like matured the sense that like, oh, there are people who are interested in me, and I've completely removed everyone from a pedestal. And I think they also can sense the comfort and the naturalness of it, where I can say like, oh, like today was such a bore, or like today was like traffic was horrible, and like this is driving me crazy. And like, and I think they respond as well when they feel that you're comfortable. And I think that just comes with time and like experience. And I wouldn't say at all that that's how I felt in the beginning. It took like a lot of time, effort, different conversations, and also also mistakes happen along the way. You say the wrong thing, or someone makes you feel like you're not really worth their time, and that feels horrible, but it's going to happen sometimes, like regardless of who you are. So just accept it and like know that there are good people out there who are also happy to exchange thoughts, and like keep that in perspective all the time.
Makes sense. So we've been talking about like the networking when you have the opportunity, when you are in the space where there are people that you can network with, where you have already arranged a call. I guess for a lot of us, including myself, the hardest bit is actually arranging this call, arranging this space, or like put yourself in this space. And I guess like not only have I noticed that you are really good in maintaining this space and creating like good environment for yourself and for the other person, but you're also good at finding this space or creating these spaces if they are not available. I guess what are your learnings in that area? How do you put yourself in the environment where you can learn from other people, where you can talk with different type of people?
Okay, so I think it's a different approach in person versus virtual. So in person, I don't look at my phone. I present my body language like open. Like I would literally walk around a venue and I would just like put my hands behind my back and I would just like walk and smile. And I felt like being like approachable in that way is already one step, as opposed to being in the corner on your phone. Second is hang around the food table. The chances of someone not having someone to talk to at the food table and you can say something about the food is like very easy. Plus myself, I just like eating the food at the food table anyway, so it's like a natural gravitation spot for myself. And then you can like pick it up and say like, oh, like how did you end up here, or like what brings you here, etc. And then I think like when you're in person, like when you're walking around, like you can also make eye contact and like just be warm about it. How do you people respond to eye contact a lot, and they might also feel awkward there. They might also not know who to talk to, and that's completely fine. Virtually, I would say that I've sent out hundreds of cold messages on LinkedIn saying like, hey, I'm really excited by your profile. I'd love to learn a bit more about your impact investing experience. Like, would you have time for a 15-minute chat? And I have this like one sentence or two sentences that I would kind of structurally use, because there's certain things that I flagged that like it's important to show that you've identified them as a person as interesting to talk to. Like it's not just like a generic mass message. It's like, why is their profile interesting for you? Why do you connect with it on a different level? It's like, I'm extremely passionate about decreasing climate emissions by this point in time, and I want to know what are the skill sets I need to know for that, for example, somehow like that. And then I think the third thing is to also show mindfulness and respect for their time. So like, could I have a 15-minute chat with you? It shows like it's like an entry point to not completely waste like an hour of their life. And then some people will respond, some people won't. If you're able to get that response, that's great. And then the basic etiquette follows, like follow up on time, show up to the meeting, get it in their calendar, show up prepared. and show up with thoughtful questions and show a lot of gratitude for that happening. And then I think also the chances of them referring you to other people to talk to is very high if you show that like gratitude and respect and particularness. I think it's a bit I think the more how would I say busy people you talk to, the more specialized you need to be in like doing that intro and also the questions that you ask, because I think it's a bit out of the water if someone's still asking someone who did investment banking 5 years ago about like, oh, what was your experience doing investment banking? It's like, okay, that's already experience is removed. You can go to like thousands of other people in the world to ask that knowledge. Why don't you ask that knowledge specifically for that person that they're most interested to talk to and like most relevant for them to talk about?
That makes sense. That makes sense. So now you are networking not only with founders or with potential mentors, but you're also networking with people who might potentially invest and give you money in return of like building this relationship. And I'm curious, how are you still maintaining this level of curiosity, but also have this in mind, like have money in your mind, in the sense of like at the end of the day, investors are needed not only to just like support you and mentor you, but also they're needed to give you money. And I'm curious how involvement of money changes the vibe of networking, or how do you approach this type of networking? And how do you make best out of it?
So like first of all, I'm not at an angel investor level where I can be the sole decision maker and say, oh, I want to give you $100,000 like now. So I think that also changes the layer of it. Like when you're working for an institutional investor, there's more like you need to go through an investment committee or you need to go through a program. So as a role as an associate, for example, in a type of company is more so to like establish like, is there relevance and interest within it, and how fruitful would this be for like a further deeper conversation. And I don't think the conversations would differ that much in that sense that if you can identify that they're interesting and curious and they can sharply answer your questions, I think it's the same conversation. But that's for the initial one. And then as you go into the deeper conversations, you need to come prepared with more questions and more due diligence that they can respond to, so that you can actually establish it as like a valid investment target.
So money doesn't make things as awkward for you, right?
I don't think so. I think it's like that opportunity is like essentially it's like you're creating value for both people. If you think of capitalism as like a zero-sum game, then it's like I get money, you don't get money. But it's actually, I think if you listen to like or read Paul Graham's essay on wealth, for example, it's like when you think about the startup and venture capital space, it's about value creation out of small and scarce resources. And then that makes me think of every founder investor conversation more so about multiplication of wealth rather than giving or taking. And then that attitude, I think, makes conversations very abundant.
So since like you have this good networking skills and probably you talked with a lot of people, smart and established people, what do you in general think about what makes established people exceptional? What do you think? Do you have any kind of view on what are their common characteristics?
So I think something that I've noticed is that like they have this attitude that everything is possible and everything is achievable. That it doesn't matter if you want to create a tunnel underground between two countries or whether you want to launch your own private rocket ship agency, they think it's possible. And I've gotten some great advice from someone who said that it's just as much effort to create a big thing as it is to create a small thing. So why not just create a big thing? So I think that's number one. Number two is I think they're mindful of how they spend their time. and how they dedicate their energy and what they say yes or no to. So a framework that I use and I've learned from is like, does every part of your day consist of like peace, profit, or purpose? And so does it fulfill you on like a peaceful level? Does it bring you joy? Does it bring you nurture? Or purpose, does it contribute to your greater life mission and like what you're striving towards? Or profit, like is it giving you a salary and income at that moment? And if the answer is no, they would maybe evaluate like why are they spending their time on that, and they would recalibrate their day.
And also interesting that you mentioned Angry Birds, that you were playing like in the middle school, that you were playing Angry Birds. And as far as I know, as Nurpay said, one of your mentors, founder of Angry Birds. It's interesting, like how did you know? How did you meet founder of Angry Birds, and how did you approach him?
I would say that I met him through a warm introduction from someone from the Violet Ventures community, and she had collaborated with him on like a previous project. And so if she like, so because of that relationship and because of her working with Violet Ventures, she connected with him, and it was an obvious connect because of Finland, because of working on Slush. He was the founder of Slush as well as the founder of Angry Birds. So there was like a natural synergy and project to work towards, and hence he started like mentoring more Violet Ventures and myself on like how can we expand the Violet Ventures brand in the UAE.
In general, how did you understand that you like? I don't know. How did you understand that you need a mentor right now? Does it happen like automatically? I mean, you met some person and I need this person as a mentor, or you beforehand you search for a mentor?
I think there's like also a framework that I've learned, which is like there are people that you need in your time of your life, which is a sponsor, someone that talks about you and advocates for you in your place. There's a mentor who talks with you, and there's a role model who you look towards, and there are coaches who speak to you about what to do. And at first I just thought all of these were like one bucket of person, but actually each person is very different, and it comes at different points of your life and serves a different purpose. And I've been unintentionally seeking kind of wisdom and career advice and life advice from different people, and I think that comes from the interest to build relationships. And now that I'm understanding this framework, I can also see how would a coach advise me differently, and like, am I looking more for coaches right now at this time of my life, or am I looking more for a sponsor who can advocate for me at the workplace, or like advocate for my projects as well? So then I think that's an interesting framework for a young person to think about, of like, how can I nourish each sector, and like which one's most relevant for me at this time.
Yeah, that's fair. I actually never thought of this framework. That's a great way to put, because sometimes I'm a bit confused. What do I really want, especially working in a corporate world, whether I want a sponsor or a mentor, someone to speak up for me or someone to guide me. But yeah, apparently because like, as you said, usually you seek all in one, but potentially you might need just one type of mentor. Um, So, Anna, we talked a lot about like mentorship, about your career, and we're approaching the end of the podcast, and wanted to know what are your advice for people who are interested in finance, VC, or investment banking world, and in general, any advice or final thoughts that you want to leave?
I think for a lot of young people who are looking to go into those roles, they've heard a lot about the prestige and reputation and salary that is associated with them. And the number one advice I would give to any young person is like, have enough conversations with the people doing those things, understand what their day-to-day is like, understand what they like, what they don't like, what they're stimulated by, and how much skills they're learning, and who is assisting them to gain those skills. Because depending on that answer, a lot of it might be coming independently and a lot of struggle, or you might be getting like incredible guidance in building those skills. And then I think if you've done enough conversations to validate those questions, you'll be prepared for and ready to thrive in any role that you have, whether it's finance or venture capital, etc. If you end up doing an investment banking job, be prepared to know what you're actually going to be doing and how many hours you're going to be working. And if you are, then that's an amazing opportunity for you, and that's something that you validated that you want. If not, then keep having, if that's not what you want, have enough conversations with other people to determine what that might be.
Yeah. So big gain from this podcast is learning from other people, being curious about other people actually enables you not to only learn, but also potentially establish best path for yourself.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Anna, for this episode. We really enjoyed it. I personally gained a lot of insights about the world where I don't really play as much, but I'm really curious about like startup world, and I guess at some point every single startup might think about raising investment from venture capital, and I'm sure that you're going to be one of the best founders and angel investors. So we'll reach out to you at any point. Are there any like contacts where people can contact you? Anything that you want to say?
Yeah, 100%. So I would say you can look me up, Anne-Maria Salmela on LinkedIn, like Anne-Maria, or you can follow me on Twitter and we can tweet with each other. And like my name is Anne Salmela with the E in Salmela as a number 3. And we can link them in the description as well. So thank you so much, guys, for having me. I feel very honored to be your first English-speaking guest.
Yeah, thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, guys.